The cold was a physical weight, pressing the breath from her lungs. It seeped into her bones, a constant ache that mirrored the gnawing emptiness in her belly. Sarah huddled deeper into the thin, threadbare shawl, pressing her back against the rough-hewn planks of the barn wall. The wood offered little warmth, only a brief shield against the wind that whipped across the open land, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant pine. Days bled into one another, marked only by the grudging retreat of the sun and the deeper chill of night. She had come seeking shelter, any shelter, after being cast out, the whispers and condemning glares of the townspeople following her like a pack of hounds. Now, she was little more than another shadow clinging to the edges of existence, scavenging for scraps, invisible to the world save for the occasional harsh word or suspicious glance. Her eyes, wide and hollow in her gaunt face, watched the man who emerged from the deeper shadows of the barn's interior. He was large, roughly built, with a face weathered by sun and solitude. They called him an outcast too, whispered stories of his past, reasons why he lived apart, beholden to no one. Fear prickled along her skin, a familiar companion. He moved with a quiet competence that both unnerved and intrigued her. He carried something small in his hand. As he drew closer, the faint, sweet-sour smell reached her. An apple, bruised, discolored, one side soft with rot, but still an apple. A treasure in this desolate landscape of hunger. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze direct but unreadable. He didn't speak, just held it out. Hesitantly, she reached a trembling hand, taking the offered fruit. It was cool and heavy in her palm. She sank her teeth into the less rotten side, the burst of slightly sweet, mealy flesh a shock to her empty stomach. He sat down against the wall opposite her, not too close, respecting an unseen boundary. He pulled a pipe from his pocket, loading it slowly, the scrape of tobacco the only sound in the quiet dusk. "Cold," he finally said, his voice low, gravelly. It wasn't a question. She nodded, chewing slowly, trying to make the small piece of fruit last. He watched her, his eyes giving nothing away. Then he shrugged off the heavy, sheepskin-lined coat he wore. It looked worn, patched, but substantial, radiating a faint warmth. He held it out towards her. Her breath caught. Acceptance felt like stepping into the unknown, a vulnerability different from the one she already endured. Refusal felt like inviting the frost to claim her completely. "You'll freeze out here," he stated, not unkindly but factually. He gestured with his head towards the barn's wide, dark entrance. "Inside, it's warmer. There's a fire." Hesitation warred with desperation. Every instinct screamed caution, warned her of men who offered shelter with hidden costs. But the cold gnawed, the hunger a constant ache, and his eyes, though stoic, held no malice, only a quiet observation. He wasn't demanding, wasn't leering. He was simply offering. A rotten apple, a coat, a corner near a fire. Basic needs, met without condition. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken questions and the weight of her decision. Finally, slowly, she pushed herself to her feet, clutching the half-eaten apple, her gaze fixed on his. The coat remained extended, an invitation and a lifeline. She took a shallow breath and stepped towards him, accepting the heavy garment, the first tentative step towards an unknown warmth. The scent of wood smoke and something else, clean and faintly animal, clung to the rough wool as she pulled it around her thin shoulders. It felt like a small, impossible shield. Inside the barn, the air was thick with the smell of hay, livestock, and the comforting scent of wood smoke. A small fire crackled in a makeshift hearth built from stones and mud in one corner, casting flickering shadows that danced on the rough-hewn walls. It wasn't much, a simple, Spartan existence, but it was shelter. He moved quietly, adding a small piece of wood to the fire. Sarah watched him from the edge of the firelight, still wrapped in the too large coat, feeling exposed yet strangely hidden. Her mind, dulled by hunger and fear, slowly began to process the reality of her situation. She was indoors. There was fire. He hadn't spoken another word since they entered. He gestured towards a small pile of clean straw near the fire. You can rest there. She nodded, her voice caught in her throat. She moved stiffly, the ache in her joints protesting, and sank onto the straw. It rustled softly beneath her, surprisingly soft compared to the frozen ground. She pulled the coat tighter, feeling the warmth penetrate her chilled skin. She ate the rest of the apple slowly, savoring each bite, the small amount of food a balm to her empty stomach. He didn't press her with questions. He simply went back to his task, whatever it was, in the deeper shadows. The quiet was different from the oppressive silence outside. It was a space, filled only by the crackle of the fire and the occasional snort or rustle from the livestock in the stalls beyond. Her initial fear began to subside, replaced by a wary exhaustion. She watched his silhouette moving in the dim light, a solitary figure in his own quiet world. He seemed content in his isolation, asking for nothing, offering what little he had without ceremony. This was not the harsh judgment of the town, nor the predatory nature of men she had encountered on the road. It was simply survival shared. Over the next few days, a silent routine established itself. He would share his meager food, hardtack, sometimes dried meat, broth made from salvaged bones. He never offered much, but it was enough to keep the worst of the hunger at bay. She helped where she could, small tasks like gathering dry wood, mending a tear in his simple clothes with a needle and thread he provided. Dialogue remained sparse, functional. More wood. Yes. Finished. Good. Her internal world, however, was a tumult of warring emotions. Relief at the safety, fear of the unknown, the persistent shame of her past, and a growing, fragile sense of gratitude. She observed him constantly, learning his habits, his quiet strength, the way his eyes held a depth of understanding that few others possessed. He didn't pry, didn't ask about her past, didn't judge the ragged state of her existence. In his presence, she was simply a person in need of shelter, and he a person who provided it. It was a dignity she hadn't known in a long time, but the world outside his quiet barn still existed, and she knew their precarious peace couldn't last forever. Whispers had a way of traveling, even to the edges of the world. The knock came just after sunrise, sharp and demanding. It echoed unnervingly in the quiet space of the barn. Sarah froze, her blood turning to ice. She knew that sound, the sound of authority, of judgment. The man, whose name she now knew was Elias, straightened slowly from where he had been tending to a lame sheep, his movements calm despite the sudden intrusion. His expression remained unreadable, but his eyes held a flicker of something she hadn't seen before, a quiet readiness. "Stay back," he said, his voice low. The door was pushed open roughly, letting in the harsh morning light and three figures silhouetted against it. Sheriff Brody, a man whose face was set in perpetual disapproval, stood at the front, flanked by two other men from the town, their faces curious and hostile. "Elias," Brody's voice boomed, amplified by the barn's acoustics. "Heard you got company." His eyes scanned the interior, landing on Sarah huddled by the hearth. A flicker of recognition, then contempt, crossed his face. Well, look what the cat dragged in. The vagrant woman." Sarah flinched, shrinking back. The fear was back, sharp and debilitating. They had found her. The shame, the judgment, it all rushed back, threatening to drown her. One of the men leered, stepping forward. "Seems you got yourself a little helper, Elias. Maybe she can earn her keep proper." Elias stepped forward, placing himself between Sarah and the men. He didn't raise his voice, but his stillness, the quiet strength in his posture, was a clear barrier. "She's not bothering anyone, Brody. She's just shelterin'." "Shelterin'?" Brody scoffed. "More like squatting. And who's to say what else she's doing? You know the rules, Elias."
"Nostras."
"Especially not her kind," he gestured towards Sarah. His lip curled. "Drifter, no good. Probably brought trouble with her." The other men murmured in agreement, their eyes fixed on Sarah with open suspicion and malice. The air grew thick with tension, the quiet peace shattered. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She wanted to disappear, to vanish into the straw. But then she looked at Elias, standing firm, not backing down, not betraying her. He wasn't just providing shelter, he was providing protection. A fierce, fragile ember ignited within her. She wouldn't hide. Not anymore. She wouldn't be hunted and judged without a fight. Slowly, she rose from the straw, pulling the coat tighter, but not hiding behind it. She met Sheriff Brody's gaze, her chin lifting slightly, though her hands still trembled. "I am not a vagrant," she said, her voice shaky but clear. "I have simply lost my way." Brody barked a laugh. "Lost your way? You were run out. We know your type." The men started to advance. Elias raised his hand, not in threat, but a signal to stop. "She stays," he said, his voice flat, leaving no room for argument. "She causes no harm here. If you want her, you'll have to go through me." The quiet in his voice was more menacing than a shout. The tension stretched taut, ready to snap. It was a standoff, the forces of judgment and conformity against the quiet defiance of two outcasts. The moments stretched, heavy with unspoken threats. Sheriff Brody studied Elias, reading the quiet resolve in his stance, the unwavering gaze. Elias wasn't a man who bluffed. Taking him on wouldn't be easy, and it certainly wouldn't be clean. Brody's face tightened with frustration, but a flicker of caution entered his eyes. He wasn't willing to risk a messy confrontation. Not for this. Not yet. "This ain't over, Elias," Brody finally growled, his voice thick with frustrated authority. He cast one last, venomous look at Sarah. "We'll be watching. You keep her here, you're responsible for anything she does." He turned and stalked out, his deputies following reluctantly, casting backward glances of suspicion and disappointment. The heavy barn door swung shut, plunging the interior back into relative dimness. The silence that descended was different from the peaceful quiet before. It was charged, still vibrating with the recent confrontation. Sarah stood trembling, the rush of adrenaline slowly ebbing away, leaving her weak. She had faced them. She hadn't run. She hadn't dissolved into tears or pleaded. She had stood and she had spoken. It was a small victory, but it felt immense. Elias turned to her, his expression softening slightly, losing some of its hard edge. He didn't offer praise, just a simple nod of acknowledgement. It was enough, more than enough. In that silent gesture, she felt a sense of partnership solidify. They were in this together now, facing the world's judgment side by side. She looked around the simple, sturdy barn, the firelight warm and steady. It wasn't the home she had lost, nor the life she had been stripped of, but it was a refuge, a place where she wasn't scorned, where her dignity, though battered, was respected. She had arrived here a broken, starving woman, defined by her vulnerability and loss. Now she stood, still vulnerable, but also defiant, finding strength she hadn't known she possessed in the face of adversity and in the quiet presence of a man who saw her, not for the town's cruel labels, but for herself. The path ahead was uncertain. The threat of the outside world hadn't vanished, merely retreated. They would still face hardship, the judgment of others, the constant struggle for survival. But she was no longer alone. She had found an unexpected ally, a silent protector, and in the process, she had begun to rebuild herself, piece by painful piece. Resilience wasn't about never breaking. It was about finding the strength to mend, even in the most desolate of places, drawing quiet strength from the earth beneath her feet, and the unexpected bond formed in the flickering light of a barn fire. She had been offered a coat and a warm invitation inside, and she had walked through the door not just to shelter, but to a chance at reclaiming herself.